Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Daniel had always been an observant man, quiet, but attentive, the kind of person who didn't like to make a scene but noticed everything, even the smallest details. And that's exactly how it all started, little changes, almost imperceptible ones, that piled up until they were too big to ignore. Emily started spending more time in the shower. She'd leave her phone face down on the table, laugh to herself while looking at the screen, and when he asked why, she'd say, "Nothing, just silly stuff." At first, Daniel believed her. He wanted to believe. It was easier to think she was just stressed at work, that this was just a phase. Every marriage has its phases, right? But something inside him started to bother him, like the silence between them wasn't just the absence of conversation, but a sign that someone was slowly pulling away. She stopped asking questions. She stopped caring about his day. When he talked about a problem at work, she'd just nod, like she was only half listening. She always seemed in a rush, even at home. And the touch, the affectionate little touch that used to happen without reason, the light hand on his back in the kitchen, the kiss on the forehead when they passed in the hallway, disappeared without explanation. One night, Daniel made dinner. A simple gesture, but done with care. He made her favorite pasta, opened the wine they saved for special occasions, tried to create a warm atmosphere. Emily came home, gave him a quick peck on the cheek, and without even acknowledging his effort, said she was too tired to eat. She went upstairs, left her shoes in the middle of the living room, and went straight to the bedroom, leaving Daniel sitting at a table set for two, with untouched wine glasses and a tightness in his chest that he pretended not to feel. For the first time, he thought something serious might actually be going on. Life went on, but it felt forced, like something was out of place. Daniel kept fooling himself for a few more weeks. He stayed busy with work, with the podcasts he listened to in the car, even with dumb TV shows before bed. But it was impossible not to notice the disconnect. They shared the same roof, but seemed to live in different worlds. That's when he started testing things, quietly. He'd say he was working late, but come home early to see her reaction. Sometimes Emily was on the phone and would hang up the second she heard the door. Other times, she didn't even notice he'd come back. Her phone, which used to be left on the table or the couch, was now always with her, even in the bathroom. And whenever he'd come up behind her to hug her, like he always used to, she'd stiffen for a second. They were tiny details, but Daniel had always been good at putting the pieces together. He remembered old conversations. Emily had said she found it boring how predictable he was about everything. She'd said routine killed desire. He'd thought it was just a passing complaint, but those words now echoed loudly. Maybe she was looking for exactly what he couldn't give her, something new, exciting, someone who'd break the routine. He'd always believed security and loyalty were enough to keep a relationship strong. And maybe they were, for one person's point of view. Daniel wondered if he should confront her. He thought about sitting down and telling her everything he felt. But something held him back, a mix of fear and pride. Fear of hearing the truth in her own words. Pride that wouldn't let him look weak. So he decided to keep watching. And as he did, the distance grew. It was like living with a stranger. The woman he'd traveled with, laughed with, planned a future with, now seemed to have her thoughts somewhere else, like she was living a secret life right under his nose. Every new gesture, every casual comment, every random laugh fed the certainty he didn't want to admit, something had changed, and he wasn't the reason. Emily smiled more at her phone than at him. She slept facing the other way. Always busy, always with some last-minute commitment. Even the few conversations they had felt cold. And that hurt more than any argument. It was a silent cut, a lack of interest. One night, while Emily was in the shower and left her laptop open on the living room table, Daniel acted on an impulse he couldn't explain. He sat down, hesitated for a second, and opened the browser history. His heart raced. Between recipe searches and fashion sites, there it was, one address, very clear, impossible to ignore, a dating site for people in relationships. He clicked. The page was still logged in. Username, Luna_77. Daniel froze. The name wasn't familiar, but the behavior was. Between messages and visited profiles, he saw recent conversations with men, direct, flirtatious, full of veiled promises. One attached photo showed just a shoulder and part of an arm, but he recognized the tattoo, a small lotus flower on her side, the one he'd kissed so many times. There was no doubt. It was her. The account was active, updated, with daily interactions. Everything showed a confidence he never imagined Emily could have with another man. No hesitation, just desire and excitement. She talked to strangers like she was someone else, bolder, freer, more alive than she ever was with him. Daniel spent that entire night barely sleeping, torn between confronting her right then and needing to know how far it had gone. Deep down, part of him still wanted to believe it could just be a phase, some random curiosity. But the account was there, active. And what he saw made it clear, this wasn't just online flirting. It was something nurtured, carefully hidden. The next day, he decided to act. He created a fake profile, picked a simple, believable name, Mark. He used photos of an ordinary but attractive man, someone who could seem lonely, bored, open to a secret. He filled out the profile as a married man looking for real connections, no strings attached. The irony was that this profile, made in minutes, was exactly the kind of man Emily had hinted she wanted whenever they talked about personal things. The profile got approved in 2 days. Less than an hour later, he got a message. "You seem different. You're not here out of desperation. That's attractive to me. Luna_77. Daniel read it again, feeling his chest tighten. It was her. The language, the style, the tone, everything matched. He replied carefully, interested, but distant enough not to raise suspicion. The next few days were filled with pain and strategy. Daniel kept flirting, stayed attentive, showed interest. Luna responded with enthusiasm. With every new message, it became clearer she was ready to reveal everything, how she felt, what she wanted, what she'd already done. Slowly, the puzzle came together. She mentioned a dinner at a hotel the previous month, the first time I've felt truly alive in years. Daniel remembered, that night, she said she was at a conference. He stayed home, watched a movie, rooted for her. Meanwhile, she was with another man. His stomach turned. Still, he kept up the act. He needed to know more. He wanted to hear, or rather, read, what was going through her mind. And it was worse than any guess he'd made. Emily talked about Daniel like he was a burden, a man with no energy, predictable, almost invisible in his own home. She said she deserved more, that she was tired of living a normal life, and that Mark was exactly the man to pull her out of the routine. She called her husband weak, like she was talking about a stranger. Daniel read every word with his heart breaking, but he kept going. He needed proof. He needed to see how deep that abyss went. The conversation evolved. Luna was bold, confident, determined. She talked about risks, how well she hid things, how her husband was so trusting he doesn't even suspect. Daniel saved everything, screenshots, text logs, copies of the messages. He knew that at some point, he'd have to face the truth head-on. But for now, he was determined to expose it completely. For weeks, Daniel kept the profile active. He flirted, kept her engaged, pretended to be the man she wanted. And Emily, getting more involved every day, revealed more details. It was like she was finally letting it all out, not realizing the stranger she was talking to was her own husband, a husband broken inside, but still focused on uncovering the whole truth. Eventually, Luna suggested something Daniel had expected, though it still tightened his chest. "What if we met? Somewhere discreet. just to talk. My husband's traveling next week. It'd be the perfect moment. Daniel took a deep breath. The trap was set. He knew everything would change from that point on. It wasn't suspicion anymore, it was proof. It was time to confront the woman he thought he knew with the reality she'd built behind his back. Daniel already had enough to end that marriage with a single conversation. But part of him needed more than just knowing. He needed to see. He needed to put Emily face to face with the truth she'd created, unaware she'd been watched the whole time. This went beyond getting answers. It felt like a need for justice. While he'd dedicated himself to a relationship he believed in, she'd been living a separate story, as if everything they'd built together could be thrown away without regret. The next morning, keeping a neutral tone, as if mentioning something routine, Daniel looked at Emily and said he had to travel for work. He mentioned an urgent meeting with a client in another city that had come up last minute, and that he'd be gone for 2 days. Emily gave a brief look of surprise, raised her eyebrows, murmured "Really?" while stirring her coffee. He confirmed, said he'd already booked a hotel, and would leave after lunch. Emily just told him to drive safely and went back to her phone, as if his absence was just another convenient moment for her. Daniel grabbed a small suitcase, packed a few clothes just to keep up the story. For the first time in years, he noticed a faint smile on his wife's face at the thought of him being gone. He drove his car a few blocks, parked at a supermarket, locked the vehicle, and walked to a rental place. He rented a dark, generic sedan, no stickers. He spent hours walking, mentally rehearsing what he'd say, how he'd act, what he'd do that night. He was afraid of losing control, of yelling, of shaking. But above all, he was determined to show her he wasn't naive. That night, he parked 3 blocks from his own house, turned off the headlights. He watched the street. Everything was familiar, but now it felt like foreign territory. Minutes before the agreed time, he calmly typed, "I'm here." The reply came almost instantly. "Door unlocked. Come in fast, so the neighbors don't notice." Daniel took a deep breath. His face showed nothing, but inside, something had finally broken for good. He stepped out quietly, looking at his own house as if he were a stranger about to enter unknown territory. The same front, the same porch where they'd laughed together, but now it all felt like an empty set. He pushed the door gently. It was slightly open, just as she'd promised. Soft music came from the living room, a romantic track that, under different circumstances, might have been touching. Now, it was just another detail in Emily's script. Daniel entered silently. Then he saw her. She was in front of the mirror, fixing her hair. She wore clothes he'd never seen, something way too provocative to be casual. Clearly, she was getting ready for someone special. Daniel stopped. It was a side of her he'd never known, the side that happily prepared to welcome a lover into the home she shared with her husband. Emily turned slowly, still smiling. But the smile vanished when her eyes met his. She froze. Her lips parted, as if her voice had been stolen. Her face turned pale in an instant. Daniel stayed still, staring straight at her, not saying a word. The silence between them became suffocating. He didn't yell. He didn't ask, why. He took one step forward, pulled his phone from his pocket, and placed it on the table beside her. The screen was already on, message after message, every conversation between Emily and Mark, the photos, the confessions she'd written with excitement, everything right there, visible to the one person who should never have seen it. Emily stepped back, unable to look away from the evidence. Then, as if trying to undo a nightmare, she started making excuses. Her words came out confused, shaky. She said it was just a game, that she never meant for it to go anywhere, that she'd been lonely, curious, that it was a moment of weakness. Daniel listened in silence, eyes fixed on her face, expressionless, like he was hearing a story that had arrived too late. Emily reached out, tried to touch his arm, but he pulled away. He took a black folder from the bag he'd left on the couch. Inside were the divorce papers, already prepared. He pulled them out and handed them to her without a word. She hesitated, but took them, still in shock. Daniel looked around the house, almost as if he were saying goodbye to something that no longer mattered. He walked to the door, opened it, and before leaving, looked at her one last time. His eyes were calm, without anger, without urgency. Before she could say anything else, he was gone. He left without slamming the door, without making a scene, certain that this chapter had ended on his terms. In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself alone from every angle. The friend who'd encouraged her to try something new, saying everyone has a right to a secret, disappeared, ignored her messages, acted like she'd never been involved. At work, attitudes changed, whispers, rumors, a sudden coldness in the hallways. Her social life shrank, as if everything she valued had evaporated. She tried to contact Daniel. She wrote long messages, crying as she typed. She apologized, said she regretted it, tried to justify each act with weak excuses, claimed it was just a mistake, insisted he was still the love of her life, said she'd do anything to have him back. But Daniel never responded. Her messages stayed unread, her emails bounced back, and his number no longer existed. It was like he'd erased every bridge between them. And she knew why. After everything, Daniel chose to forget. He chose peace. He began rebuilding his life at his own pace. He reconnected with old friends who genuinely wanted his happiness, friends Emily had called boring or immature. He returned to old places, cozy cafes, walking trails near the city, small getaways that reminded him of who he was before he lost his spark. Slowly, his life regained color. It was during this time that he met Natalie. She came into his life effortlessly, without promises or pressure. She was just someone who didn't wear masks or try to impress. Natalie didn't push with endless questions about his past, but she had a way of looking at him that made him feel truly seen. He didn't tell her everything right away, his wounds were still too fresh, but she respected his time. She'd sit with him in silence, laugh at simple things, share light stories. For the first time in a long time, Daniel smiled without feeling a weight in his chest. Natalie never tried to compete with a ghost. She didn't try to replace Emily or become the woman Daniel once imagined. She was simply herself, and that was enough. With her, he realized he didn't need to fear betrayal anymore, because her eyes were honest, and every word came with sincerity. After so long, Daniel finally started smiling again. Meanwhile, Emily found herself sinking into the loneliness she'd created. Her phone, once full of notifications, was now silent. The new clothes she'd bought to impress Mark sat in a drawer she refused to open. She avoided her own reflection in the bedroom mirror. Every corner of the house reminded her of the choice she'd stubbornly made. She tried going out, meeting new people, pretending to move on. But everything felt empty compared to the life she'd thrown away. The most painful part was realizing that, if she could go back in time, she might make the same mistake again. Because Emily didn't just betray Daniel, she betrayed herself. The woman who believed she was independent, smart, and irresistible discovered she was fragile, impulsive, and unable to hold on to her own happiness. Now, all that remained was the echo of her choices. Daniel, on the other hand, never sought revenge. His silence was stronger than any outburst. He chose the harder path, moving forward in peace, without letting bitterness poison him. And that's what hurt Emily the most. He didn't need her, not even to hate her. His indifference said it all. It was over. Because when love ends in silence, it's because it's been gone for a long time. All that's left is the emptiness of realizing, too late, that you've lost everything, believing you'd never be found out. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.